everyone. Welcome to the second episode of GroupM's Better Advertising series. On today's episode, we will be diving into policy shifts and what it means for our brands and their consumers. I'm Krystal Olivieri. I lead data strategy and partnerships for GroupM Data and Technology. And joining me today will be Nicola McCormick, who is our Global General Counsel for GroupM.
Hi, Krystal. Really happy to join you today.
For a good place to start, I'd love for you to just give us an overview of policy in general around data privacy. What has been changing, why it's been changing, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think this year has probably been quite notable. There's two fairly seismic shifts. I mean, we started back in 2018 with the implementation of GDPR, but of course then we've been getting to grips with how that actually works in practice. And the big shift on that this year has been the introduction of the new version of the transparency and consent framework, which is the operational setup really for how publishers and technology partners all communicate with each other to drive compliance with GDPR in Europe.
Topics like GDPR and CCPA have been really big topics for us and for our brands and for their consumers. And figuring out how to navigate this new regulatory requirement, which varies on a market-by-market basis, has been a really fascinating but also challenging experience. And I had always thought that this was something that was fairly new. I had really, outside of a few sort of basic constructs, the concept of privacy outside of just privacy policies on people's websites was not something I really had dove into much detail on. But Nicola, you helped me understand that this is something that's existed for quite a long time. And I think your knowledge around that's really great. So I'd love if you shared it with everyone also.
It started back in a sort of principle-based approach and almost an academic discussion back in the 80s and earlier. So it sort of comes out like a lot of law does, I guess, out of ethics. And then it becomes codified and hardened. And as soon as it starts to get quite difficult, that's when you and I have to start having these conversations when, the real world and product clashes with legal.
So Nicola, you just touched on one of our favorite words, which is ethics. And we spend a lot of time talking about data ethics, not just within the construct of our products and building privacy by design and ethical solutions that our clients can leverage, but also how clients can start to bring data ethics into their decision-making processes when they are thinking about their data strategies for media insights and activation. And I know that this is an area where we have so much passion about, because we really do believe that just because you can doesn't mean you should. But I would love to get a bit more insight into your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, it's really funny. So when you started talking about just because you can doesn't mean you should, it's like I would challenge you with what do you mean by that? And as lawyers, we quite like our frameworks and to set some clear rules around it. And that's I think that's what's been really interesting actually, and that's what we've been navigating, because we've been on this journey together trying to make sure that all our products are compliant, that all our relationships are compliant, that we're complying with the letter of the law. And what all that does a lot of the time is create a lot of tangled governance around everything. And I think what's been really useful about our discussions around ethics is like, well, what is it all really trying to do? So when we've had difficulties, you and I sort of applying this law to a product or considering how we should act, we've gone back to what is the law actually trying to get at? Who's it trying to protect? What's its ethical foundation, effectively? And once you've got that in mind, I think we found it then much easier to navigate the right decisions to take in terms of applying that black letter law.
Yeah, it's a great point. I use the term, and Nicola's going to probably roll her eyes at me, but I use the yick factor a lot, because as a consumer, I am a consumer first. So I often think about the different tactics that brands and agencies want to deploy. And I put myself in the center of that. And I say, if I were a consumer and I had this type of tactic taking place, would I be comfortable with it if I knew about it? And that's really what the heart of, I believe, some of the conversations around ethics have really been around. From a consumer's perspective, would they be expecting that? Yeah,
I think that's right. I mean, I think the thing is, there's been what this law and the changes in law, so whether it's TCF2 or it's CCPA, they're all about giving consumers information. And that's great, but I don't think very often consumers know what to do with that information or really actually understand how to navigate that information. And that circles you back around to this concept of ethics, right? That's when, you as the person trying to be compliant, whether you're the product or the brand or whatever it is, have to go, well, that's all very well. The consumer's getting the information now, but do they really understand it? Or do I have to do more? And then you start thinking from that ethical perspective. I've done my compliance. What's now my ethical position here?
Yeah. And I think this fits really nicely into those broader brand safety conversations. Because when you think about what brand safety is supposed to do, it's supposed to protect the brand's reputation. It's supposed to make sure that the brand isn't on, improper content, running against invalid traffic, not seeing humans in the wrong place. But we actually went a step further and thought, how did you actually decide that that was the human you wanted to target? Yeah. So it's really exciting for me personally, and an evolution of a path that GroupM has been on for years, because it really helps round out that puzzle. Yeah,
I think that's right. I mean, and for me, it's nice because it's going beyond just implementation of law, and it's thinking about the jurisprudence of these things, where they come from, why do we have them, and really getting to the heart of that and going, well, if I'm a brand, then if I'm putting the consumer at the center of everything, if I'm thinking ethically about how I should relate to that consumer, what decisions then do I need to take about the technology I'm using, about the data that I'm using, about the way in which I'm using that data. And it is that, and we're not alone in this concept of data ethics now, I think is one of the the biggest waves of the next thing that we need to be thinking about.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm really excited to see some of our big brands leaned in to these types of conversations, providing their own thought leadership around this and collaborating with us to help solve for this problem.
And I think that's the problem. Solving the problem is really at the nub of it. That's what's hard, right? Yeah. Because that's when I start challenging you and going, well, okay, saying that something is icky is all very well, but how, what's the decision-making process there? How do you decide that something makes you feel uncomfortable? And how do you then operationalize that? How do you make your whole business, think in the same way and take decisions taking into account all the same factors? Because the human at the center differs, right? There's loads of different humans, and yet we've got to try and take some consistent decision making about that and get away from just saying something's icky and say why that's wrong.
It's been a good challenge for me. And I've enjoyed all of our different conversations around that because, I guess icky isn't a defined term at this point as it pertains to data ethics, and therefore difficult to actually justify. So figuring out why your gut is telling you that something may not be right, and then mapping it into, well, within the ethical bounds, why doesn't this feel right, has been a big exercise that we've been going through and challenging each other on, and really, I believe, coming up with some really interesting working hypotheses and decisions against that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, our journey, when it started out with recognizing that this was a thing we had to address, and to sort of having some high-level principles that we wanted to take ethical views from a consumer standpoint. I think that was our starting point, right? And then we tried to write down all the different things that we thought were unethical or that engaged an ethical debate. It always seems like it seems like a contradiction in some ways because ethics sounds so lofty. But it has to be a reality. It has to be a working reality, and we have to tell people how to do ethics.
Nicola, thank you so much as always for the conversation. We obviously do this quite a bit, but it's always fun to be able to share the insight and topics that we discuss more broadly with all of you. Thank you for joining our second episode of GroupM's Better Advertising series. Please be on the lookout for the third episode, which will cover the excellent topic of fake news. So thank you for having us, and have a great day.